Welcome to the Fat Games Podcast. On this episode, we have a very special guest. He's a longtime friend of mine, and for the first time on this podcast, we are leaving the indie space and going AAA. I'd like to welcome Doug Demyen to the podcast. Thanks for joining us, Doug. How are you doing?
Not too shabby. How about you guys?
Oh, we're doing great.
Doing
I'm still
swell.
recovering from shingles, so if you were wondering about the scarring, that's where I got it from.
So on the previous podcast, I made a joke that Gary's brother gave him herpes.
Well, that would be technically true. You gave me chicken pox back in the day.
Yeah, we're explaining our jokes, and chickenpox is a herpes virus. So anyway, so Doug, welcome to the podcast. So happy you're here. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, how long you've been working in AAA, and what kind of got you there, and why you're doing this crazy racket?
Sure. So I've been working in video games for just about 15 years. After getting my bachelor degree with I went off to U of A to get my master's because of its proximity to and relationship with BioWare. So I ended up doing a master's in like pathfinding to try and do kind of a gamey thing, and pulled every string I could to get an interview with BioWare, and I got one and I got in somehow. So I worked there for a few years. First project I was on was unreleased. It was codenamed Revolver. I can talk about that now because it's in a book that BioWare released with like pictures and stuff of the 25 years they've been around. So shameless plug for that, I guess. After that, I was on Mass Effect 2 for a little bit. Then I transferred to BioWare Montreal, where I worked on Mass Effect 3. After that, I moved to Halifax and I worked for a few companies there. There was Silverback Productions, where I worked for like kind of smaller games. They were mostly hidden object games and a couple other things. Then I worked for Frontier, which was a satellite studio. They're a AAA company mostly out of Cambridge, England. And they briefly had a satellite studio in Halifax. Then I worked at a kind of a startup called Orpheus on a game for Sons of Anarchy, like a mobile game, which was quite the thing. Then I worked for Hothead, where I worked on other mobile games. So there was the Killshot series, and then the Halifax studio. This was another satellite studio for the main company. This time, the big one was in Vancouver. So after the Killshot games, Halifax kind of had its own game, which was called Mighty Battles, which was closest analog of like Clash Royale. And then after that, I came back to Edmonton and BioWare, where I kind of worked for a little bit at the tail end of Anthem, and now I'm working on something else. That,
Something else?
Yeah.
So mysterious.
Something that you're on NDA for?
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you anything that's not public, but you could Google what BioWare is working on now, and I'm sure you could get a couple of tidbits that
Could
they
find
released.
some rumors and stuff.
Yeah.
So you mentioned at the very start of all that yes, we went to school together at the wonderful University of Regina. I actually had forgotten you did your master's degree in Edmonton. I completely forgot that part. So I didn't realize you had a master's degree, or at least I forgot. Great. It's all actually it was a long time. It's all really interesting. So, what did you think of working on mobile games?
I thought about the same as working on smaller games, where it was the advantage of those is it's usually a smaller team, so there's a little less overhead. If you're attracted to kind of getting a feature done, getting it in, seeing it working very quickly, then that would be the type of development you'd like, whether or not it's indie games or mobile games or that kind of thing. They're definitely, as far as design goes, oh, I should mention, I didn't even say I'm a programmer. That's the side of games that I work on. Oh yeah, another thing I feel I should mention, all these things are my own opinions, blah, 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 check all the boxes.
Oh, he's got to do his disclaimer.
Yeah. So anyway, so mobile games design-wise kind of has their own world they live in, as far as most things are free to play. You kind of either have to make your money with ads, or you have to kind of convince people to spend a couple of bucks here and there to get, whether it's loot or extra lives or whatever it is. So
yes, we were quite unsuccessful at that with Burgle's Bounty, but anyway.
It's a tough market to actually get into, but the ones that make money just make crazy money.
So last podcast, we had Andrew Garahan on from Computer Lunch, and they released Cell to Singularity, and it's got over 10 million downloads on Android. He has been quite successful with that game, and I'm very happy for him. But yes, as you said, they can make a ton of money.
Yeah, it's very sink or swim is my understanding of that market for sure.
Is there actually like much marketing that goes into these mobile apps that are successful, or is it mostly just pure luck?
It's a lot of marketing, and that side of it, I got to see a little bit of it when I was at Hothead, because they were actually pretty transparent as far as how it worked, which was kind of neat to see. And there's a lot of like statistics to that, and it's a whole art form to be like, where to buy ads, how many to buy, to funnel however many people in, how many people can we convert to paying money or like to sticking around past a certain 30 days or whatever it is. So it's,
yeah, I attended when I was developing Burgle's Bounty, I attended a lot of sort of sessions on user retention, where to spend your money, how to capture the whales and get them to keep spending more and more and more. It was mobile game development didn't really seem like game development to me, and more like you're building.
It was more like a
product
science
and
versus an
retention.
art.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, but you have to have the product there to actually to get them in the door, and then find ways to tweak the product to keep them.
Yeah. So I mean, making a game that has high retention is making a fun game. So there is that side of it, but then the side that, say marketing looks at it is very like math-like you said.
Right. So I'm going to take us away from mobile stuff, because it's what's that?
Sour spot, Blair?
Sour spot, perhaps, yes. But I think anyone listening would probably be more interested to hear about Doug's work on Mass Effect 2 and 3. So you've already confirmed that you did some work on there. What can you tell us about that experience?
Let's see. In broad strokes. When I joined Mass Effect 2, it wasn't close to being done, but it was far enough that it had like a direction and that kind of stuff. So I wasn't on it like from the very genesis of the thing. But in broad strokes, I worked on design tools, so stuff for like writers and people making missions and that kind of thing, and also the lip sync type of stuff. So there's a whole pipeline for the however many tens of thousands of lines of dialogue that there are in those games. So I looked after that, and I did some of the back-end tools and stuff for like the DLC and stuff. So fun fact, I got an extra or additional programming credit on Mass Effect 2 for the DLC. So if you download every DLC, I'm in the credits like a dozen times or something.
Oh. So lip syncing, like how painstaking is that? That sounds incredibly difficult.
It's not done by hand. There's a whole bunch of technology involved.
Is it kind of like motion capture even of people's faces? Just like, I'm curious. what can you talk about, if anything?
I'm trying to think.
You
I
try to
would say,
divulge industry secrets.
yeah, there's a whole lot to it. Is probably what I can say. But yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, and looking after it was a full-time job. So,
Wow. So what about for other languages and localizing? Did you do that too?
sort of a little bit, like there are systems to do all that kinds of stuff, and it's sort of part of it. But that was mostly in other people's wheelhouses, I think. So yeah, and it wasn't, so it's a big system. I was worked on it, and it wasn't just me. It's a big job for sure.
So I'm going to ask a question that's a little off script here. BioWare is now owned by EA. That's definitely no secret. Did anything change when that acquisition happened to sort of how you found your experience with the company?
That happened there when they bought it, but it was pretty close to the start. So EA, they definitely didn't they didn't come in with a big hammer and say you're doing everything our way. It would be probably a silly idea for them to do that, because BioWare was already successful. That's why they bought them. So for the most part, there was a sense of what you're doing, and we don't want to disrupt that. But at the same time, there's there were a lot of tools and things at our disposal that being part of a big company afforded BioWare, which is good. So yeah, and now, I mean, they have all sorts of processes and things in place that, whether it's for HR and stuff, they don't just throw a bunch of millions of dollars over a fence and go like, well, we hope a game comes back. They do oversee it in some sense, but I mean, for the most part, I think BioWare has been left to do what they do best.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, kind of a hands-off approach. I mean, I think I've heard that a lot from acquisitions within the game industry from people I've talked to here in New York, that if a company is successful and they're making their financial numbers, the parent company kind of just leaves them alone and only really cracks down if things start to slip up.
Yeah, that is a good general rule for business, I think. So,
Right. So when you're working for some of those smaller companies I guess some of them were AAA companies, but when you're working those satellite offices out in Halifax, I know you had some less than positive experiences at I think one of them. Are you able to talk about that?
Yeah, because screw them. You'll be talking about Orpheus, which was the startup that did the Sons of Anarchy game. So my thinking in joining them was that if they were able to get the Sons of Anarchy license, that they must have their stuff together a little bit. And it turns out that's not necessarily the case. So I don't know who in software in general, but I think it's probably just on the spectrum of what you can expect from a startup. Things are a bit willy-nilly and stuff, and maybe sometimes they pan out and everybody who got in at the start's a bajillionaire, and then there's other times like this one where you don't know if you're going to get paid and if things are the right amount or what have you. And in this case, I mean, they were good and bad about how the company was run and how the project was done and that kind of thing. But the main thing is the guy who owned the company was, I will be diplomatic and say sketchy. And then I will be less diplomatic and say he's a scumbag. So yeah, when people aren't being paid and that kind of thing, things can fall apart pretty quickly, and that's kind of what happened there.
I can imagine. I don't think I would be too happy if I weren't getting paid.
No, and fun thing I learned, if the company you work for owes the CRA, which is the Canadian IRS for the American viewers, if they owe the CRA a bunch of money, the CRA can take money directly out of your bank account, which was fun to learn. So a paycheck just like weeks after I got it.
What? That sounds insane. The government, oh wow. Oh, that is so something that would not happen in America, but I can't say for sure that that's true or not. I mean, it just sounds like something that the Americans would hate.
I would have said there's no way that happened here either, but turned out that's not the case.
You would think you'd want the people to be paid before the government, but maybe not.
I think there was some funny business going on with that side of it too. So yeah, I can't say anything for certainty, but yeah, the whole situation was sketchy. So
that's I'm sorry you went through that. That sounds pretty awful. And that's probably one of the reasons you ended back at BioWare.
Yeah, all my paychecks since I came back here have been very prompt and correct.
Yeah, I mean, they're not. EA isn't exactly a small shop, so that's great. So pivoting a little bit. A few years ago, and actually EA was a little bit slammed by this in some of the gamer media. The questions about crunch time. How has that experience been? Has it gotten better or?
So I'll say, first of all, in my opinion, well, more than once there have been articles written about a place that I've worked at while I've been there, and they've theoretically talked to people from the company, and the articles have been so far off that it's almost beyond belief. So
it's a media narrative rather than the truth. That doesn't surprise me too much.
I mean, it's not to say that it doesn't happen, but I don't trust any articles at all, really. Anything where they kind of purport to know what's going on behind the scenes or anything, I kind of don't even bother with that kind of stuff. So I can only talk from my personal experience, and that is, a small slice of a few companies at certain times and that kind of thing. I have heard the odd bad story about crunch time, but for the most part, I haven't got anything too bad. Like in the 15 years I've worked in the game industry, I've probably done a year of crunch total. And I'd say 90% of that was voluntary, just kind of trying to, work a little bit extra here and there, pace myself so I'm not like making mistakes or completely burning myself out, and just get a lot of things done. Maybe a couple of times has been the kind of like, everybody's got to stay here until this is done, or that kind of thing. But I think for the most part, that was remnants of like very early on in the industry when game teams were very small, with like 23-year-olds, and they would work.
And they're poorly managed, etc.
Yeah, or just they were very small and that kind of thing, and it probably kind of tapered off for a few years. But I think any company worth its salt kind of understands that people with experience are more valuable than somebody you just got. You can kind of squeeze them a little bit and then they leave. So and most people, now that the industry is a little more mature, people are homeowners, they have spouses, they have kids, and a lot of them, if you told them, okay, you got to work 70 hours a week for the next year, they'll say, well, I'll just work somewhere else. And another company would be very happy to have them. So a lot of companies can't really, get away with being too bad. It definitely is a thing. Generally, I kind of plan to be kind of busy around the end of a project.
Yeah, that makes sense for any project, regardless of the industry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, probably run into that in just general software, I imagine. And even like other salary jobs get it too. Like my mom was a banker and she worked more Saturdays the last year before she retired than I have in my whole career. So it does happen. Companies, for the most part, at least try to avoid it as much as you can, but realistically, unless you're Valve and you can survive because you get 30% of every video game ever, you eventually have to produce a game and it should make more money than it costs to make. So there's always a bit of pressure there, but companies are, for the most part, getting better at managing it. And it's mostly about not kind of lying and going like, we're almost done, so we're going to keep our date here. And then, but everybody knows that's definitely not going to happen. So.
Yeah, I think from everything that generally happens in the game industry, it's better to be late than deliver something shitty.
Yeah, people are definitely better at not being impatient. I would say like gamers in general, but the other side of it is you can be infinitely patient and say like, you know, take another 10 years to make your game. And, you know, if it makes it better, which is cool, but if that bankrupts the company, or if by the time they release it, they don't make back all that extra time, then it doesn't really help that they were patient. So there's always a little bit of that pressure for sure. You do have to be smart about it.
Right. So going back in time a little bit, let's go back in time to 15 years ago. You, me, and the OG Fat Games, Phil, Gary, and even to a lesser extent maybe Brad, you're the only one who went into AAA video game development. Like, what motivated you to like? Why did you pick to do that instead of, I don't know, going and becoming a software engineer for, I don't know, a bank?
I don't know. I think I probably would have done that, but then I did a summer at the U of R doing research for Dr. Hamilton, you'll remember, and that kind of led me down the path of like, this is research. This is kind of what getting a master's degree would be. So I started looking into that, and then that U of A had kind of a partnership with BioWare. Like, that would be pretty cool. So I went there. I did kind of gamey things. And I was even sort of on the fence with that. And then the professor who ended up being my supervisor had a class where it was to do something for his real-time strategy game. So I'm like, you know what, screw it. I'm going right down the game path. So I took that. I ended up doing my thesis in pathfinding. And I was just like, let's, you know, pedal to the metal. Let's try and get a job in games, kind of thing. And I almost didn't. I actually very briefly started at another company because BioWare's hiring process was kind of lengthy. So I was there for not very long until I went like, all right, bye guys, I'm getting my dream job. So, but yeah, there was a few like branches where I might have gone down a different route, but I ended up here.
In the multiverse, maybe you ended up somewhere else.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm sure there's most alternate versions of me are not here.
Hey, Doug, would you say that your job is actually very resource oriented, or is it a lot of just like coding? Or do you actually do a lot of research to be able to like execute certain things that the game needs?
No, there's very little research, I would say, at least for my job. I remember when I was doing my master's and looking at it from that side, there was always a thing like, why don't game companies use more research? You know, this is we have all this cool stuff, and definitely now looking at it from the other side, it's like, no, you have to get this feature done right here, and that's, I mean, every company. That's not certain ones. So the idea on this side of going to your manager and saying like, hey, can I have like 5 months to just screw around and see what falls out? Like now the to-do list for a game is way, way longer than that.
So would you say that, like, I guess a lot of the technology you use in games is kind of technology that's already been developed, and you're just trying to
yeah. And again, that's from my side. So there are, say, components of engines, for instance, like maybe if you're working on an engine, you might do, you know, there's no shortage of really interesting problems in this kind of space. So like, I know people who have written like a memory manager for a PlayStation and like a renderer for an Xbox and that kind of thing. And there's definitely research to be done there, or like snow deformation or that kind of thing. So there's definitely pockets of it, but it kind of, yeah, you either have a particular interest to make it, or if you're working as part of a game team, you generally grab it as a known commodity. So yeah, there definitely is research there, but yeah, from the side of a game team, for the most part, you're just kind of, you definitely do have deadlines and that kind of thing, where a big question mark about research would be a tough pill to swallow as far as people trying to schedule things and that kind of thing.
So can you say if BioWare generally uses their own engine, or if they're using something off the shelf like Unreal or Unity?
Well, let's see. You might have to just look it up and see if it's public knowledge. I think the engines that we've used over the years have been public knowledge and stuff, but I know back in the day when it was more common, like BioWare used to make their own engines and then their games, and then they actually released the engines for like people to mod the games and that kind of stuff. And then like now there are very few engines because it's such a giant undertaking with all the next gen consoles. Now
It's very expensive.
Yeah, it's crazy expensive. So yeah, we're definitely not developing them. But yeah, look it up. I'm sure that knowledge exists somewhere.
Sounds good. I might just do that.
Yeah.
So 15 years in, it's a long time. You still love what you do?
Yep. It's definitely, I mean, it's a challenge for sure. It's not like that Westwood commercial where you're just holding a controller and like the game falls out, as you know.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, like there's different challenges wherever you go. Like for you guys, you know, working on games that aren't hundreds of people, there's definitely different challenges than bigger ones, but you'll definitely run into them no matter where you go, and that's good.
Karendow has 3 non-full-time people working on it right now.
Yeah, that's
our Trello board goes out to 2026.
We really just have a single principal developer and an asshole who makes music.
We also have a guy out of Madrid who we're paying to make graphics for us, who I quite like. He's doing a great job. Well, him and another guy are doing it.
Yeah, he's very talented.
Yep. His name is Sandalo. So Doug, 15 years in, you haven't wanted to take the plunge into the indie side of things, you know, take that risk, not make any money at all, you know, just take on all that crazy risk.
I mean, I always think about it. You do the kind of grass is greener on the other side of it, where you just think about all the fun side of it, where you're kind of punching the stuff and seeing it in game and being really proud. And then you remember that you have to do things like find people in Madrid to make you graphics and do a podcast so that people know about you and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so, I don't know how well it's working yet, but anyway.
So yeah, for the most part, no. I've gotten the kind of being part of making a game that you're really proud of from, games that millions of people love, like Mass Effect and Anthem and that kind of thing. And then for the other side of it, I've played around with little prototypes on my own, which I generally can't. Most companies have a clause in their contract where you can't just release games and sell them, but that's kind of handy because then I can just kind of play around with them until I get bored and not feel bad that I'm abandoning a project, whereas you guys actually want to release it. So
one day.
Yeah.
So I feel like you do have like a project in the back of your mind that if the stars aligned, you would love to do.
A project or projects or that kind of thing. Like I've done game jams and that kind of thing. I've played around with, like I made a little game out of a DDR pad and made one that kind of hooks up to my spin bike and that kind of thing. So a bigger project, I don't know if there's the kind of thing that I would think. How many years is Kids of Karendow going to take? I don't know.
A few more years, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I have that kind of stick-to-itiveness to anything floating around in my head right now.
Well, let me ask you a question. There's something that kind of you said there that caught my attention. Are you more motivated by a technical challenge when it comes to developing games, or is there something else there?
I've found when I've been working on things on my own, there are two things that I am usually interested by. And one is just like a gameplay concept, like a small little fun thing to do.
So a play mechanic.
Yeah. So yeah, like I've made little racing games where like you're trying to pay attention to a top down and a side view at the same time. And it's just like to see if it's fun, that kind of thing. And then the other is usually I'll run into a technical aspect of it that I find interesting. So I was coming up with a prototype to see if like steering by touch screen and then flicking to drift would be kind of fun. And I ended up making a system to kind of stream in and out chunks of the world in a game that probably didn't need it, but just while I'm at it, I want to kind of work on something like that. So it's kind of those couple of things. And then there's stuff I hate. So like level design, I found if I'm doing a game jam, I'll leave that till like the last second. So
yeah, I actually quite enjoy level design. When I sit down and think about things that I want to have happen, and actually say, oh yeah, I could do this and make this happen. And with Karendow, I've been trying for every area to make something different about that area that's new to the player. Sometimes it's small, sometimes it's bigger, just some sort of puzzle or challenge that they need to figure out while they're going through the area or something like that. Because it's not fun if you're always doing the same thing over and over again. Or maybe it is. Depends on, that's just me, I guess.
I would actually really like level design if I could either draw or if it was like easy to like actually like make or like produce the level. But yeah, that's just something that I've always kind of sucked at. So
yeah, I was trying to hope that I can make something procedurally generated and then I won't have to worry about it. I don't know why that's one of the things, but it is.
The buzzword of, well, at least a couple of years ago, everything was procedurally generated. And that was what you'd see as the pitch line for every indie game in New York City, I swear to God. It's like, nope, not procedurally generated. This is static. This is what you see is what you get. You know what you're getting.
Handmade.
Yes. Artisanal. Yeah, I like that. We should use that in Kids of Karendow's marketing.
Handmade. Oh my goodness.
Handmade, artisanal.
I remember handmade, locally crafted was like the big buzzword around here a few years back.
Was that for beer?
Everything.
Yes, you're not an indie game developer, you're a craft game developer.
Ah, I like that.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. I like that.
So so this is something that I talked about on our last podcast. But with respect to games, for you, Doug, is this some kind? Do you get a lot of artistic personal expression from this, or does the AAA space kind of take away from that a bit?
I would say you get a little bit more hands-on with the creative side of it in smaller games, whereas AAA games, there's enough moving parts that it's tough to just like get something in and that's, just somebody's offhand suggestion kind of thing. Just because like, the things that go into it can be like player research and like market stuff and then how long it'll take. Whereas, some of the smaller games like in the prototype days of Mighty Battles, basically the one other programmer and I on it changed the genre of the game it was in one day. So you definitely have a little bit more to play around with there. The challenges in AAA tend to be more. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Something like that happened at Diablo as well. That used to be it was supposed to be a turn-based battle system, and then they made it real time, like overnight one day.
Yeah, I think I've heard of a few things like that where it just kind of on a whim people can do that, which is, definitely fun to see. But yeah, AAA there's definitely a bigger runway of, to get ideas realized. So the challenges tend to be more either technical or even organizational or that kind of thing, and a little less creative. Although I shouldn't say like, if I had suggestions, designers aren't just going to be like, well, you're not in our club, so just go away. But there is a lot of moving parts to making those decisions, so they can't just do everything on a whim for sure.
Sounds great. I only have one question left, but I'm going to check with Gary to see if he's got anything.
Well, you already asked the question that I usually ask every guest, which is about their dream project. But Doug already answered that one, so I'll have to punch that one right back to you, Blair.
Sorry, dude, we stole your thunder. All right, Doug. So I asked the same question to all of our guests. What kind of advice would you give to someone, maybe a younger version of yourself, maybe me, maybe Gary, maybe just someone else on the internet, about how to get into this? Like, if someone wanted to go into AAA game development, what would you tell them?
So yeah, I was thinking about this. The only advice I'd have for younger me are not philosophical. They're very specific. So it'd be like, don't buy that Chevy. It's a piece of shit. And you guys already know what you're making. You know how you're making it. You know your audience, that kind of thing. So
well, don't make too many assumptions there, but we're working on it.
You know better than I would anyway. The advice I could think of for somebody who, say, wants to get into game development, I would say just be learning things because you never know what will come in handy. I thought my into the game industry would be coming up with a Pathfinder that just decimated all existing Pathfinders. Turns out it was because I knew my way around a database. That's why I was hired. So you never know. Just learn stuff. Can't hurt.
Huh. Interesting. Doug, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you. It's been so long since I've seen you in person. I'm hoping to remedy that soon. But yeah, thanks for doing this. And yeah, thanks for coming, and we'll chat with you later.
Thanks for having me.
Peace, Doug.